In this video, we shall continue rearranging simple formula. Now, before we start rearranging these formulas on the right, let's first of all look at the simple equations that we have on the left, and we shall solve them and use the same processes to rearrange the formulas on the second column. So, example 1a on the left. Solve this equation. So the first step is, remember the goal is to have x on one side. So we need to get rid of the positive 5. And the opposite of adding 5 is subtracting 5. So we can start by subtracting 5 on each side. Now, 5 minus 5 will be equal to 0. So that's gone. So basically what we shall end up with is 21 minus 5 is equal to 2x. Now 21 minus 5, that will be equal to 16. So 16 is equal to 2x. Now, at this stage here, we haven't finished solving this equation because we have 2x on the right hand side. We need to have x on one side. So the next step will be dividing by 2, because the opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. And what we shall end up with is, of course, 2 divided by 2 will be equal to 1. So that will be 1. So our solution will be x is equal to 16 divided by 2, which is 8. Okay? We can apply the same process on the right. So the first step will be subtracting r on each side. So subtract r on the right, r on the left. So we shall end up with p minus r is equals to ax. And then the next step will be to divide by a on each side. Because a is multiplied by x. Now a divided by a will be 1. So basically we shall have our solution as x will be equal to p minus r over a. Okay, so x is equal to p minus r over a. Okay, we can apply the same process in the next two examples. So on the left, we shall start by getting rid of the negative 4. So add 4 on the right, add 4 on the left. What we shall end up with is 11 plus 4, which will be 15. And 4 minus 4, or negative 4 plus 4 is 0. So we'll just be left with 3x. And then the next step is dividing by 3 on each side. So divide by 3 here, divide by 3 there. So we know that 3 divided by 3 will be equal to 1. So we are left with 15 divided by 3, which is basically 5, and that 5 will be equal to x. So x is equal to 5. That's our solution. Okay, on the right hand side, we shall start by similar steps. Okay, same process. Start by adding g on each side, because we have negative g, so add g on each side. Now we know that negative g plus g, or g minus g, will be 0, so that's gone. So we'll be left with n plus g is equal to mx. The opposite of multiplying by m is dividing by m, so we divide by m on each side. So we shall be left with n plus g over m is equals to x, because m divided by m is equals to 1. Okay. All right, let's carry on. Example 2, solve these equations. So, and the process is similar. Okay, remember here we have positive 5 added to x. So we need to find a way of getting rid of that positive 5, which means we are going to subtract 5 on each side. So we subtract 5 on this side and subtract 5 on that side. So 5 minus 5 will be 0. So basically, this is gone. We end up with x is equals to 16 minus 5, and 16 minus 5 will be 11. So basically, x is equals to 11 is our solution. Um, and we can apply the same process to the right, which means you can start by subtracting p on each side because p is added to x. Now we know that p minus p will be 0. So basically, x will be r minus p. Okay, so x will be equal to r minus p. And we can apply the same process to the second uh, question B. So subtract 8. 8 minus 8 will be 0. So you're left with 3x is equals to 14 minus 8. So 3x is equal to 6. And then you can go ahead and simplify this. Divide by 3 on each side because 3 is multiplied by x. Divide by 3. So we know that 3 divided by 3 is 1. So x will be 6 divided by 3, which will equal to 2. So x is equals to 2. That will be our solution. We can apply the same process to the right. Start by subtracting n on each side. And we shall be left, by the way, what's n minus n? N minus n is equals to 0, which means that will be 0. So you're left with bx is equals to g minus n. And the opposite of multiplying by b is dividing by b. So we divide by b on each side. B divided by b is 1, so x will be g minus n over b. And that will be our final solution. Okay, we can apply the same process in example 3. So rearrange the formula to make x the subject. Okay, we want x to be on one side, so we can start by getting rid of the minus h because you want x to be left on one side. So the opposite of subtracting h is adding h. We can add h on each side. Now we know that h minus h or negative h plus h will be 0, just like negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So we'll have v plus h is equals to 2ax. Now, you can see that x here is multiplied by 2a, okay? And the goal is to be left with x only. So we are going to divide by 2a to get rid of 2a on the right. So divide by 2a. So 2a divided by 2a, that will be equal to 1. So that's gone. So we'll be left with v plus h over 2a is equals to x. Okay, on the right hand side, we shall apply the similar process. We want to be left with x, and you can see that rtx is k is added to rtx. So what you're going to do is to subtract k on each side. So if we subtract k on each side, what we shall end up with is k minus k will be equal to 0. So that's gone. So what we shall be left with is e minus k is equals to rtx. Now you can see here that rt is multiplied by x. Now the opposite of multiplying by rt is dividing by rt. So we'll divide by rt on each side. And if we do that, rt divided by rt will be equal to 1. So that cancels. So we'll be left with e minus k over rt will be equal to x. And that will be our final solution. Example 4. Solve these equations, and we have a negative x. Now, if you have a negative x, then the first step can be to try and make this negative x to be a positive. What I mean by that is we can start by adding x on each side, and negative x plus x will be equal to 0, just like negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So that is gone. What we shall be left with something that is familiar to us, that we can handle, which is 2 plus x is equals to 13. So we don't have a negative x anymore. Okay? So the next step is similar to the previous examples. Subtract 2 from each side. So 2 minus 2 will be equal to 0. So x will be equal to 13 minus 2, which will be equal to 11. So x is equals to 11. Okay? We can apply the same process to the right. So starting by adding x on each side. So what we shall be left with is, by the way, negative x plus x will be equal to 0. So we'll have p plus x is equal to a. And then remember, our goal is to be left with x on one side. So you can subtract p from each side. And p minus p is 0. So x will be equal to a minus p. We can apply the same process to these two questions. So b on the left. So this will be equal to 0. So what we shall be left with is 9 plus 4x is equal to 17. And then the next step will be subtracting 9 from each side, because you want to be left with 4x on one side. 9 minus 9 is 0. So this will be gone. So what we'll be left with is 4x is equal to 17 minus 9, which is equal to 8. So 4x is equals to 8. And you can go ahead and divide by 4 on each side. So x will be equal to 2. Okay, we can apply the same process to the right. So the first step will be adding gx on each side. So add gx and add gx. Negative gx plus gx is just like negative 2 plus 2, which is 0. So what we shall end up with is n plus gx is equals to m. And then the next step is subtracting n from each side. So what you shall end up with is, and by the way, n minus n, that will be equal to 0. So that's gone. So what we shall end up with is gx is equals to m minus n. And then the next step is dividing by g. So divide by g here, divide by g here. And g divided by g is 1. So x will be equal to m minus n over g. And that will be our final solution. Example 5. Rearrange the formula to make x the subject. So we shall apply the same process. The first step will be adding m and x on each side. So add m and x. Because it's an equation, it has to balance. Okay. Negative m and x plus m and x will be equal to 0, just like negative 2 plus 2. So we shall be left with h plus m and x is equal to s. And then we need to subtract h from each side. So subtract h from each side. H minus h, that will be equal to 0. So you'll be left with m and x, is equals to s minus h. And then if you pay attention to this, mn is multiplied by x, and the opposite of multiplying by mn is dividing by mn. So divide by mn, and then divide by mn. Mn divided by mn is 1. So x will be s minus h over mn. Okay, on the right hand side, you have p is equals to n minus r squared x. Now, we shall just use the same process. Add r squared x plus r squared x. And what you shall end up with is p. So p plus r squared x is equal to n, because negative r squared x plus r squared x is 0, just like negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Okay, then the next step will be subtracting p from each side. So p minus p is 0. So we shall be left with r squared x is equals to n minus p. And then by inspection, you can see that x is multiplied by r squared. So we shall divide by r squared on each side. So x will be equal to, this divided by this is 1. So x will be equal to n minus p over r squared.